The Zentari Grand Fleet moved through space like a river of steel and light. Hundreds of warships surrounding the massive civilian convoy that stretched for thousands of kilometers in every direction. Admiral Kelvin stood on the bridge of his flagship Endless Dawn and watched the refugee ships with a heavy heart, knowing that over 2 million souls depended on his ability to get them to safety. The convoy had been running for 3 weeks now, fleeing the brutal advance of the Kresh Dominion across the Outer Rim colonies. Medical ships carried the wounded. Colony transports held families who had lost everything. And cargo vessels were packed with refugees who had barely escaped with their lives. "Admiral, we are approaching the Ashmore Nebula," his navigation officer reported, her voice calm despite the tension everyone felt. Kelvin nodded and studied the swirling clouds of gas and radiation ahead. The nebula was supposed to be their safe passage, a route that the Kresh avoided because the radiation interfered with their targeting systems and shields. "Take us in slowly," Kelvin ordered. "Maintain defensive formation and keep all sensors at maximum range." The fleet entered the nebula, and the view screens filled with beautiful colors. Reds and purples and blues that danced across the cosmic clouds. It would have been breathtaking under different circumstances. But today, Kelvin felt only unease. 2 hours into the nebula crossing, his worst fears came true. "Contact!" The sensor officer shouted, his voice breaking with panic. Multiple contacts, hundreds of them, emerging from the radiation shadow at coordinates. The tactical display lit up like a nightmare. Red icons appearing in every direction as Kresh warships materialized from hiding spots throughout the nebula. Kelvin felt his stomach drop as the numbers kept climbing. Over 300 enemy vessels surrounding the convoy in a perfectly executed trap. "Battle stations," Kelvin commanded, his voice cutting through the rising chaos on the bridge. All warships formed defensive perimeter around the civilian ships. "I want every weapon powered and ready." The Zentari fleet moved with practiced efficiency. Warships taking up positions around the vulnerable convoy while civilian vessels tried to cluster together for protection. But Kelvin knew it was hopeless. They were outnumbered 5-1, and the Kresh had chosen their ambush point perfectly. Transmission came through from the Kresh fleet, and Kelvin reluctantly accepted it. The face of a Kresh commander appeared on screen. His scaled features twisted in what might have been a smile. "Admiral Kelvin," the Kresh commander said, his voice hissing through the translator. "You are surrounded and outgunned. There is no escape." "Then why are we talking?" Kelvin shot back, buying time while his tactical officers ran hopeless calculations. "Because I am not without mercy," the Kresh commander continued. "Surrender your warships and I will allow the civilian vessels to depart unharmed." Kelvin felt rage building in his chest. He knew what Kresh mercy looked like. He had seen the aftermath of the Helion massacre, where they had slaughtered every surrendered soldier and civilian after promising safe passage. "I have a better idea," Kelvin said coldly. "You withdraw your forces, and we will forget this happened." The Kresh commander laughed. A horrible rasping sound. "Then you choose death, Admiral. You have 1 hour to reconsider before we begin our attack." The transmission ended, and Kelvin turned to his communications officer. "Send an emergency transmission on all frequencies. We need help from anyone who will answer. Across the galaxy on Earth, at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado." Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison was reviewing flight training reports when the emergency transmission came through. The message was scrambled and desperate, a Zentari fleet calling for help against impossible odds. Jake read the message 3 times and felt his chest tighten. 2 million civilians, mostly children and families, surrounded by an enemy that would show no mercy. He walked quickly to the base commander's office and found Colonel Lisa Hendricks already listening to the transmission with a grim expression. "Colonel, we have to do something," Jake said immediately. "The Joint Chiefs are meeting now. Hendricks replied. "But by the time they authorize intervention, it will be too late," Jake finished. His mind already racing through possibilities, Hendricks looked at him carefully. "What are you thinking, Jake?" "The F9 wraiths have jump drives," Jake said slowly. "Experimental ones. But they can make the distance. Those drives have never been tested at that range," Hendricks warned. "You could lose the entire squadron in subspace, or we could save 2 million people." Jake countered. Hendricks was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. "I did not hear this conversation, Lieutenant Commander, and I will not notice anything unusual for at least 30 minutes. Jake understood and nodded his thanks before running to the Flight Operations Center. He gathered his squadron, the Ghost Riders. 12 pilots who had trained together for 3 years and trusted each other with their lives. Captain Ryan Walsh was the first to arrive. Jake's best friend since Flight Academy, a pilot who flew with aggressive precision and never backed down from a challenge. Lieutenant Megan Drake came next. A reputation as a fierce combat pilot preceded her everywhere she went. She had more confirmed kills in training simulations than any other pilot on base. Lieutenant Frank Chun arrived with his usual calm demeanor. The oldest pilot in the squadron and the most precise. Someone who could place a shot within centimeters at full combat speed. Lieutenant Amy Parker was the youngest, barely 23 years old. But she had the fastest reaction times Jake had ever seen, and flew like she was born in a cockpit. The rest of the squadron filed in and Jake waited until all 12 pilots were assembled before he spoke. "I am going to tell you something, and you need to understand what it means." Jake began, his voice serious. "There's a civilian convoy under attack. 2 million refugees, including children, and they have about 45 minutes before they are slaughtered." The pilot shifted but remained silent. "Waiting. We can reach them if we push the jump drives beyond their rated capacity," Jake continued. "But this mission is not authorized. The Joint Chiefs have not approved intervention. And if we launch, we are committing mutiny. So this is volunteer only," Ryan said quietly. Understanding immediately. "Yes," Jake confirmed. "Anyone who stays behind faces no consequences. Anyone who comes faces court-martial at minimum." "How many ships are we facing?" Megan asked, her eyes already calculating combat scenarios. "Over 300 Kresh warships." Jake answered honestly. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Frank Chun spoke. 12 fighters against 300 ships to save 2 million civilians. "Those are terrible odds. The worst," Jake agreed. "Good," Frank said with a slight smile. "I hate easy missions." Amy Parker raised her hand. "I am in." "Sir, me too," Megan said immediately. Ryan stood up. "Ghost Riders do not leave people to die. Not when we can help." One by one, every pilot in the squadron volunteered. Not a single person hesitated or walked away. Jake felt pride and terror in equal measure. "Then let us move. We launch in 10 minutes. Grab your gear and get to your fighters." The pilots scattered to prepare, and Jake took a moment to send a brief message to his family, just in case. Then he headed to the hangar where his F9 Wraith fighter waited, sleek and deadly. Humanity's most advanced spacecraft. 8 minutes later, 12 Wraith fighters launched from Peterson Space Force Base without authorization. Their experimental jump drives charging for a journey that might kill them all before they ever reached the battlefield. Colonel Hendricks watched them go from the control tower and whispered a prayer for 12 pilots who chose to be heroes. The jump through subspace felt like falling through ice and fire at the same time. Jake Morrison gripped his fighter's controls and watched the readings climb higher than any test flight had ever shown. The experimental drive, pushing far beyond safe limits. Ghost Rider 2. Status report. Jake called over the squadron channel. "Checking on Ryan Walsh." "Still here, boss," Ryan's voice came back with forced calm, though my drive is screaming at me in 3 different warning languages. Same here, Megan Drake reported from Ghost Rider 3. My console looks like a Christmas tree of red alerts. Jake monitored his squadron and felt helpless. If even one jump drive failed during transit, that pilot would be lost forever in the space between spaces, scattered across dimensions with no hope of recovery. The jump took 17 minutes that felt like 17 hours. Finally, the fighters burst back into normal space at the edge of the Ashmore Nebula, and Jake immediately checked his roster. All 12 fighters had made it. Against all odds, they had survived the impossible jump. Sensors up. Everyone spread out and get me a tactical picture, Jake ordered, his training taking over as adrenaline flooded his system. The tactical display populated quickly, and what Jake saw made his blood run cold. The Kresh fleet had already begun its attack. Massive warships firing on the Zentari defensive line, while civilian ships tried desperately to scatter. Dear God, Amy Parker whispered over the channel. There are so many of them. Jake counted over 300 Kresh vessels against maybe 60 Zentari warships. The aliens were fighting hard, but their defensive perimeter was collapsing under overwhelming firepower. Shields failing across multiple ships as the Kresh pressed their advantage. Listen up, Ghost Riders, Jake said, his voice cutting through the fear and doubt. We did not come this far to watch. We are going to split into 3 groups and hit them where it hurts. He quickly assigned the teams. Alpha Group with Jake, Ryan, Frank Chun, and Lieutenant Bobby Grant would strike at the Kresh command carrier to disrupt their coordination Bravo Group under Ryan's direct command. With 4 pilots would create chaos in the Kresh formation using hit and run. Tactics Charlie Group, led by Megan Drake, would protect the most vulnerable civilian ships from immediate threats. Remember your training, Jake continued. We are smaller and faster than anything out here. Use that advantage, do not get into sustained firefights, and watch each other's backs. What about the numbers? Amy asked, her voice steady despite the reasonable fear. We make them think we are a lot more than 12 fighters, Jake answered. Speed and surprise are our weapons today. The Ghost Riders acknowledged and split into their assigned groups. Jake led Alpha Group in a steep dive toward the Kresh command carrier, a massive vessel that coordinated the entire enemy fleet. The Wraith fighters accelerated to combat speed, and Jake felt the familiar pressure as his fighter responded to his commands like an extension of his body. These ships were built from recovered alien technology and human engineering, faster and more maneuverable than anything the Kresh had ever encountered. Alpha Group, arm quantum disruptors, Jake ordered as they screamed toward the enemy formation. The Kresh detected them and dozens of targeting locks activated. But the alien gunners were used to larger, slower targets. The Wraith fighters weaved through incoming fire with a grace that seemed to defy physics. Jake lined up his shot on the command carrier's communication array, the massive antenna structure that coordinated the entire Kresh fleet. He fired his quantum disruptor and watched the experimental weapon perform beyond every hope. The disruptor hit the antenna and created a cascading field of quantum interference that spread across not just the command carrier, but 12 nearby ships. Targeting systems failed, communications went dark, and coordination collapsed in an instant. Good hit, good hit, Bobby Grant called out. Their whole formation is confused. Meanwhile, Bravo Group tore into the Kresh fleet like wolves among sheep. Ryan Walsh led his 4 fighters in rapid strikes, hitting weapon emplacements and shield generators before the enemy could react. Frank Chun earned his nickname Surgeon as he placed shots with impossible precision, taking out specific systems without causing explosive damage that might harm nearby civilian ships. The Kresh tried to respond, but their targeting systems could not track fighters that moved like the Wraiths moved. Pilots trained in Earth's atmosphere where wind and weather created constant challenges, found the vacuum of space almost easy by comparison. Charlie Group positioned themselves between the civilian convoy and the heaviest Kresh attackers. Megan Drake called out targets, and her group responded with practiced efficiency. Amy Parker spotted 3 Kresh torpedoes heading for a Zentari medical ship packed with wounded refugees. She rolled her fighter into an intercept course and fired 3 times. Each shot perfectly timed to destroy a torpedo before it could reach its target. Incredible shot. Ghost Rider 9 came a transmission in accented English from the medical ship. You saved 3,000 lives with that pass. On the bridge of Endless Dawn. Admiral Kelvin watched the tactical display with growing amazement. 12 human fighters had entered his hopeless battle and somehow changed everything. Who are these pilots? His tactical officer asked in wonder. Humans from Earth, Kelvin answered. But I have never seen anyone fly like this. The Zentari defensive line, on the verge of complete collapse minutes ago, began to stabilize. The Kresh assault lost its coordination and momentum as the Ghost Rider struck again and again from unexpected angles. Kresh War Master Dex watched from his flagship and felt something he rarely experienced. Confusion. These tiny human craft moved impossibly fast and fought with a skill that defied his understanding of combat. Redirect 50 ships, Dex ordered. Focus all firepower on destroying these human fighters. I want them eliminated immediately. The Kresh fleet shifted, and Jake saw the change on his tactical display. Dozens of warships were breaking formation to hunt the Ghost Rider specifically. They are focusing on us, Ryan called out. We have become the primary target. Jake made a quick calculation and realized what needed to happen. The Kresh were sending forces to hunt the fighters, which meant pulling ships away from attacking the civilian convoy. All groups, form up on me, Jake ordered. We are going to lead them on a chase. Jake. That is suicide, Megan protested. 50 ships against 12 fighters. 50 ships that are not shooting at civilian vessels, Jake countered. We need to draw them deeper into the nebula, away from the convoy. He is right, Frank Chen said quietly. We buy time for the civilians to escape. The Ghost Riders regrouped, and Jake led them toward the densest region of the Ashmar Nebula, where radiation and interference would level the playing field. The Kresh pursuit force followed. Exactly as Jake had planned. Alpha Group, split left. Bravo Group, right. Charlie Group, stay with me, Jake commanded as they entered the nebula's heart. The human pilots used the swirling radiation clouds as cover. Their training in difficult environments, giving them an edge. They struck from the nebula and vanished again before the Kresh could respond effectively, but there were so many enemy ships and the Ghost Riders were taking damage. Warning lights blazed across multiple consoles as shields failed and systems took hits. Ghost Rider 6. I am losing power, Lieutenant Danny Foster called out. His voice tight with pain. Jake checked his display and saw Danny's fighter trailing energy. The power core critically damaged and failing fast. Danny, eject now, Jake ordered. We will pick you up. Negative. Boss, Danny replied, his voice suddenly calm. My fighter still flies, and I can see that battlecruiser ahead. Jake understood immediately what Danny was planning. Danny, no, that is not necessary, sir. There are kids on those civilian ships, Danny said softly. Kids who deserve to grow up. I made my choice when we launched. Danny, Jake started to say, Ghost Rider 6. Going weapons free, Danny interrupted. Tell my mom I love her, Jake watched helplessly as Danny Foster angled his dying fire toward the largest Kresh battlecruiser in the pursuit group and fired his engines at maximum thrust. The impact came 3 seconds later as Danny's failing power core struck the battlecruiser's main reactor. The explosion lit up the nebula like a newborn star. consuming the battlecruiser and 2 escort destroyers in a ball of fire. The Ghost Riders flew through the shockwave in silence. 11 fighters where there had been 12. Jake forced his grief down and focused on the mission. Danny bought us time. Do not waste it. Continue evasive patterns and make every shot count. The remaining Ghost Riders fought on, each pilot pushing through exhaustion and fear. Covering each other as only a team that truly trusted could, Admiral Kelvin watched from endless dawn as the civilian ships began jumping to safety in groups, escaping while the Kresh fleet was occupied hunting the human fighters. Admiral, we can jump now, his navigation officer reported. The civilians are clear and our fleet is ready. Kelvin opened a communication channel directly to the human squadron leader. Commander Morrison, this is Admiral Kelvin. The civilians are safe, thanks to your courage. You can retreat now. Jake looked at his tactical display and saw that the Kresh would pursue the Zentari fleet, even if they jumped. Unless someone made them pay too high a price. Negative. Admiral, Jake replied, get your people out of here. The remaining 11 Ghost Riders regrouped in the swirling chaos of the Ashmore Nebula while the Kresh pursuit force circled like predators. Jake Morrison checked his tactical display and saw that half the Kresh fleet was now focused entirely on hunting down the human fighters. Boss, my weapons are at 30%, Megan Drake reported. Her voice strained from hours of continuous combat. Same here, Ryan Walsh added. Shields are barely holding, and my port engine is running hot. Jake reviewed his squadron status and knew they were running on borrowed time. Amy Parker's fighter had lost shields completely. Frank Chum's weapon systems were failing, and Bobby Grant was flying with only emergency maneuvering thrusters after taking damage to his main engines. Listen up, Jake said, forcing confidence into his voice that he did not entirely feel. The Zentari are evacuating the civilians, and we have given them that chance. Now we need to make sure the Kresh remember why attacking refugees is a bad idea. There are still 40 Kresh ships hunting us, Frank Chun observed calmly. And War Master Dex just brought his personal dreadnought into the fight. The tactical display showed a massive vessel entering the battlefield. The Relentless, a Kresh dreadnought that had destroyed entire fleets in previous wars. It was over 2 kilometers long and bristled with enough firepower to level a planet. While that is just showing off, Ryan muttered. But Jake heard the worry beneath his friend's joke. Admiral Kelvin's voice came over the communication channel again. Urgent and concerned. Commander Morrison, you have done more than anyone could expect. The civilian ships are jumping to safety as we speak. You and your pilots can retreat now with honor. Jake watched another group of civilian vessels vanish into jump space on his sensors. Families, children, wounded refugees all escaping to safety because 12 pilots had chosen to intervene. 11 pilots now. Jake corrected himself, thinking of Danny Foster's sacrifice. Admiral, if you jump now, will the Kresh follow you? Jake asked, already knowing the answer. Kelvin hesitated before responding. Yes, they will pursue us through subspace. They want to finish what they started. Then we stay, Jake said firmly. We make them pay such a high price that they decide continuing this fight costs too much. Commander, that is suicide, Kelvin protested. You cannot stop a dreadnought with 11 damaged fighters. Watch us, Jake replied, and closed the channel before the Admiral could argue further. He switched to the squadron frequency. Ghost Riders, I am going to give you all a direct order, and I need you to follow it for once without arguing. We are not leaving you. Jake, Ryan said immediately, understanding where this was going. You are going to jump back to Earth and tell everyone what happened here. Jake continued, ignoring the protests erupting over the channel. You are going to make sure Danny's sacrifice means something. You are going to ensure that people know we stood up for those who could not defend themselves. Absolutely not, Megan said fiercely. We are a squadron. We fight together. That is a lovely sentiment, Jake shot back. But I am pulling rank. This is a direct order from your commanding officer. Frank Chun spoke up, his calm voice cutting through the argument. Jake, there has to be another way. There is not, Jake said quietly. The Kresh need to learn that threatening innocent people while humans can fight means consequences. Someone has to teach them that lesson. Amy Parker's voice came through. Young and frightened but determined. Sir, we did not come all this way just to abandon you. You came all this way to save 2 million lives, and you did that. Jake replied, his throat tight. Now I need you to save yourselves. Go home. Tell the story. Make it count. Jake, Ryan started to say. That is an order. Ghost Rider 2, Jake interrupted, using Ryan's call sign instead of his name, making it official. All Ghost Riders except Ghost Rider 1 will jump to Earth immediately. Anyone who disobeys will face court-martial. The silence on the channel felt like it lasted forever. Jake could imagine his pilots arguing with themselves, wanting to refuse but bound by military discipline and the chain of command. Sir. Amy began. Jump now, Lieutenant Parker, Jake said gently. That is an order. One by one the Ghost Riders acknowledged, their voices heavy with grief and anger. Ryan was the last to respond, his voice barely controlled. You better be a ghost when I see you again. Jake, Ryan said, using their old academy joke about coming back from impossible situations. Because I am going to kill you myself for this. I will haunt you appropriately, Jake promised, managing a smile despite everything. Now get out of here before I change my mind. The 10 remaining Ghost Riders activated their jump drives and vanished, leaving Jake Morrison alone in his Wraith fighter facing 40 Kresh warships and a Dreadnought War Master. Dex watched the human fighters retreat on his tactical display and felt a mix of relief and disappointment. These pilots had fought with impossible skill and courage. Worthy opponents who had cost him dearly. The human fighters are fleeing, his tactical officer reported. No, Dex corrected. Studying his sensors, 9 of them fled, 1 remains. The bridge crew looked at their displays in confusion as a single Wraith fighter accelerated toward the Kresh fleet, heading directly for the Relentless. 1 fighter attacking a dreadnought? The tactical officer said in disbelief. That is madness. Dex said nothing but watched the approaching fighter with growing respect. This pilot knew he could not win, could not survive. Yet he came forward anyway. Open a communication channel. Dex ordered. Jake's console blinked with an incoming transmission, and he accepted it. Seeing the scaled face of a Kresh commander appear on his screen. Human pilot, Dex said in surprisingly good English. I am War Master Dex, commander of this fleet. Congratulations, Jake replied dryly. You have fought well, Dex continued. Better than any opponent I have faced in 30 years of war. Surrender now, and I give you my word as a warrior that you will be treated with honor. Jake actually laughed. Your word? Like the word you gave at Helion before you massacred everyone. Dex's eyes narrowed. That was different circumstances. No, Jake interrupted. It was you showing what Kresh honor really means. So forgive me if I decline your generous offer. Then you choose death, Dex said, sounding genuinely regretful. A waste of a skilled warrior. I choose to protect those who cannot protect themselves, Jake corrected. I choose to stand against bullies like you who prey on the weak. I choose to make sure the Kresh remember this day. Remember what exactly? Dex asked, curious despite himself. Remember what happens when you threaten innocent people while humans can still fight. Jake answered. He closed the channel and checked his fighter systems one last time. Weapons nearly depleted. Shields at 15%. Main power fluctuating. But the quantum disruptor had 1 charge remaining, and his jump drive still functioned. Jake looked at the massive dreadnought. ahead and made peace with what he was about to do. He thought about the 2 million civilians now safe, about Danny Foster's sacrifice, about his squadron making it home to tell the story. He thought about his family back on Earth and hoped they would understand why he made this choice. Then Jake Morrison deactivated his weapons, rerouted all remaining power to engines and shields, and accelerated directly at the Relentless at maximum thrust on the Dreadnought's bridge. Dex realized what the human intended and felt a moment of genuine shock. Evasive maneuvers, all power to point defense. Shoot that fighter down now. The Relentless tried to turn, but Dreadnoughts were built for firepower, not agility. Point defense cannons fired desperately, but Jake weaved through the incoming fire with the skill of someone who had nothing left to lose. The distance closed rapidly. 3,000 meters, 2,000, 1,000. Jake armed his quantum disruptor and set it to overload, creating an unstable field that would tear itself apart on impact. He also set his jump drive to activate at the exact moment of collision, a combination that had never been tested because it was theoretically impossible to survive. He did not need to survive. He just needed it to work. 500 meters from impact, Jake whispered a final message that his fighter automatically transmitted to Earth. For Danny, for the Ghost Riders, for everyone who could not fight back, this is Ghost Rider 1. Going weapons free, the Wraith fighter struck the Relentless directly above the main reactor section at full combat speed. In the same instant, Jake activated the quantum disruptor at point-blank range and engaged his jump drive. The combination created a catastrophic reaction that should have been impossible. The quantum disruptor destabilized the Dreadnought's reactor containment while the jump drive opened to subspace. Rupture inside the vessel's core, the Relentless tore itself apart from within. Metal and energy and crew consumed in a blast that registered on sensors across 3 star systems. The explosion consumed 50 nearby Kresh warships that had been escorting the Peleus Dreadnought War Master. Dex died in the first microsecond of the explosion, never fully comprehending how a single pilot in a small ship had destroyed his mighty fleet. The surviving Kresh vessels retreated in complete disarray, their command structure shattered and their confidence broken. Admiral Kelvin watched the explosion from the Bridge of Endless Dawn, which had delayed its jump to ensure all civilian vessels escaped. He stood in silence for a long moment before speaking. 3 days after the Battle of Ashmore Nebula, Earth received transmissions from across the galaxy and the world. Changed in ways nobody had anticipated, Colonel Lisa Hendricks stood in her office at Peterson Space Force Base and watched the news reports flooding in. Every major network was covering the story of 12 pilots who had launched without authorization and saved 2 million alien refugees. The first transmission came from the Zentari Grand Council, delivered by Admiral Kelvin himself and broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy. The Zentari people recognize humanity as brothers in arms, Kelvin announced, his image displayed on screens across Earth. This is the highest honor our civilization can bestow, reserved for those who have shown courage beyond measure and compassion beyond reason. The transmission included footage from the battle, sensor recordings that showed 12 tiny fighters facing 300 warships, human pilots weaving through impossible fire, sacrificing themselves to protect strangers they had never met. The second wave of transmissions came from the refugees themselves. 2 million messages of gratitude, drawings from children showing human fighters racing through flames, videos of families who would have died without intervention. One message came from a Zentari mother holding her infant daughter, tears streaming down her face as she spoke in broken English. Thank you. My baby lives because of your pilots. I will tell her every day about the humans who saved us. Hendricks felt tears in her own eyes watching the messages pile up. Then her assistant knocked and informed her that she had been summoned to Washington for an emergency military tribunal. The tribunal convened 2 days later in a secure Pentagon conference room. Hendricks stood at attention before a panel of 3 generals and 2 admirals. Knowing her career was over, General Martinez, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, reviewed the charges in a flat voice. "Colonel Hendricks, you are accused of allowing the unauthorized launch of 12 experimental fighters, failing to report the launch for over 30 minutes, and deliberate dereliction of duty." "Yes, sir," Hendricks replied calmly. "I accept full responsibility for my actions. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" General Martinez asked Hendricks' thought about the 2 million lives saved, about 12 pilots who chose courage over safety, about Jake Morrison's final transmission that had brought her to tears. "No, sir," she answered. "I would make the same choice again." General Martinez exchanged glances with the other tribunal members. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. "Colonel Hendricks, this tribunal finds you not guilty of all charges," Martinez announced. "Furthermore, you are hereby promoted to general and assigned to oversee the formation of a new rapid response division." Hendricks stood frozen in shock. "Sir, I do not understand," Admiral Stevens spoke up. "General Hendricks, the world has changed in the past week. We have received formal diplomatic contact from 47 alien civilizations, 30 of them offering alliance specifically because of what the Ghost Riders did. The public supports those pilots overwhelmingly," General Martinez added. "And frankly, so do we. They showed initiative, courage, and moral clarity when our own bureaucracy was paralyzed by indecision. We need more people willing to make those kinds of calls," another admiral said. "Congratulations, General," Hendricks saluted, still processing what had just happened. As she left the tribunal room, she thought about Jake Morrison and Danny Foster, wondering if they would have believed how much their sacrifice had changed everything. At Peterson Space Force Base, the surviving Ghost Riders returned to Earth as heroes, but they did not feel like heroes. They attended a memorial service at the base chapel, where Jake Morrison and Danny Foster were posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Captain Ryan Walsh stood at the podium to deliver the eulogy, his dress uniform immaculate but his eyes red from crying. The chapel was packed with military personnel, civilians, and even a delegation of Zentari diplomats who had traveled to Earth specifically to pay their respects. "I have known Jake Morrison since Flight Academy," Ryan began, his voice rough with emotion. "He was my best friend, my wingman, and the finest pilot I ever flew with." Ryan paused and looked at the photographs of Jake and Danny displayed at the front of the chapel. "People keep calling us heroes," Ryan continued. "But Jake and Danny were not trying to be heroes. They saw people in danger, and they refused to look away." He described the moment Jake had ordered the squadron to retreat, how every pilot had wanted to refuse, how Jake had pulled rank and made them go. "He gave us a direct order to jump to safety and tell the story," Ryan said, his voice breaking. "The hardest order I ever followed was leaving him there alone." Megan Drake sat in the front row with the other Ghost Riders, tears streaming down her face. Beside her, Amy Parker held her hand tightly, the young pilot's shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Frank Chun stood and walked to the podium when Ryan could not continue. He took a moment to compose himself before speaking. Danny Foster was 25 years old. Frank said quietly. He loved baseball, terrible action movies, and he made the best barbecue ribs I've ever tasted. The chapel filled with soft laughter at the memory. People grateful for a moment of lightness. When his fighter was dying, Danny had a choice, Frank continued. He could eject and save himself, or he could use his last moments to protect the civilians we came to save. He did not hesitate, Frank said, his voice firm. He aimed his fighter at the enemy battlecruiser, and his last words were about the kids on those refugee ships. Kids who deserved to grow up. the Xanthari delegation stood in unison, their military protocol demanding they honor a fallen warrior. The humans in the chapel followed, everyone rising to their feet in silent respect. After the service, General Hendricks announced the formation of a new squadron bearing the name Ghost Riders, dedicated to humanitarian intervention and rapid response operations. The original surviving pilots would form the core leadership, training new pilots in the tactics and courage that had saved 2 million lives. This squadron will carry forward Jake's legacy, Hendricks told the assembled crowd. We will be ready to help those who cannot help themselves. We will race through any flame to reach those in need. At the entrance to Peterson Space Force Base, workers installed a new monument. It showed 2 Wraith fighters racing through stylized flames toward a cluster of stars. Cast in bronze and standing 3 meters tall, the inscription read, "They saw those who could not defend themselves. They saw certain doom. They saw impossible odds. And they went anyway." Below that, the names, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison and Lieutenant Danny Foster, Ghost Riders. Forever Ryan Walsh stood before the monument at sunset on the day of its dedication, reading the words over and over. The rest of the squadron joined him one by one until all 10 surviving pilots stood together in silence. He wrote a letter, Amy Parker said softly, to be opened if he did not return. The pilots looked at her in surprise, and Amy explained that Jake had given the letter to the base chaplain before launching. It had been delivered to his family, but they had requested it be shared with the squadron. Frank Chun read the letter aloud, Jake's words flowing across the evening air. "I know what I am doing may seem reckless, but to first join the military to protect people. All people, even ones from across the galaxy. Even at the cost of everything. When you see those who cannot fight facing those who will not show mercy, you have 2 choices," the letter continued. "Look away and live with the weight of it forever, or race through the flames and sleep soundly knowing you did what was right. I chose the flames," Jake had written. "And I hope you understand why." Ryan wiped his eyes and looked up at the monument, at the bronze fighters frozen in their eternal charge toward the stars. "We understand." "Buddy," Ryan whispered, "we understand." Around the world, people watched news coverage of the memorial service and the monument dedication. Jake Morrison's final letter was shared on social media, quoted in newspapers, discussed in classrooms. A movement began, small at first, but growing rapidly. Young people enlisted in the military citing Jake and Danny as their inspiration, wanting to be part of something larger than themselves. "They showed us what it means to care about strangers," one recruit told a reporter. "I want to be someone who races through the flames too, in the Xanthari territories." Jake Morrison and Danny Foster became legends told to children. Schools taught about the Battle of Ashmore Nebula and the 12 human pilots who changed everything. Remember, Xanthari teachers told their students, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing what is right despite the fear." The 2 million civilians saved by the Ghost Riders sent a collective gift to Earth. A garden planted at Peterson Space Force Base, filled with plants from dozens of worlds. A living memorial to the pilots who had given everything. At the center of the garden stood a tree from the Xanthari homeworld, its silver leaves reflecting sunlight like mirrors. A plaque explained that this species only grew in places of great honor. The surviving Ghost Riders took turns maintaining the garden, finding peace in the quiet work. It became their ritual, a way to remember and to heal. Admiral Kelvin visited Earth 6 months after the battle and stood before the monument with General Hendricks. The 2 military leaders shared a long silence before Kelvin. 1 year after the Battle of Ashmore Nebula, humanity's place in the galaxy had transformed completely, and the Ghost Riders had become more than a squadron. They had become a symbol of what courage and compassion could accomplish. Captain Ryan Walsh, stood in the briefing room at Peterson Space Force Base and looked at the faces of 30 new Ghost Rider pilots, recruits who had joined specifically because of Jake Morrison's legacy. They were young and eager, their eyes bright with determination. "Let me be clear about something," Ryan began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen combat and survived. "Being a Ghost Rider is not about glory or fame. It is about making the hard choice when no one else will." The recruits listened intently as Ryan described the original mission. The unauthorized launch, the impossible odds. He did not soften the reality or make it sound heroic. Jake Morrison committed mutiny, Ryan said bluntly. He risked court-martial, his career, his life, because he saw people in danger and refused to accept that politics or bureaucracy mattered more than saving them. That is what this squadron represents. Ryan continued. The willingness to do what is right, even when it costs everything. Lieutenant Megan Drake stood beside Ryan, now promoted and serving as the squadron's tactical officer. She had trained half these new pilots personally and knew each one's strengths and weaknesses. "You will be held to a higher standard," Megan told them. "Because the Ghost Rider's name means something now. It means that when civilians are in danger, when the innocent need protection, we answer the call." Frank Chun, promoted to major and serving as the squadron's chief instructor, added his perspective in his characteristically calm manner. "We are not invincible," Frank said. "We lost Jake Morrison and Danny Foster, two of the finest pilots humanity has produced. Do not let their sacrifice make you reckless. Let it make you careful, precise, and absolutely committed to bringing everyone home." Amy Parker, now a captain and the youngest squadron leader in the military, spoke last. She had grown from the nervous 23-year-old who volunteered for an impossible mission into a confident leader. "Every time you fly, you carry the memory of those who came before," Amy said. "You carry the trust of the civilians who depend on us. You carry the responsibility of proving that humanity deserves the respect we have earned." The training was intense and comprehensive. New Ghost Riders learned advanced combat tactics, humanitarian response protocols, cross-cultural communication, and the kind of split-second decision-making that had defined the original. Mission General Hendricks visited the training frequently, watching the new pilots develop with a mixture of pride and concern. She understood that every mission carried risk, and that one day she might have to write letters to families explaining why their sons and daughters were not coming home. But she also understood that the Ghost Riders saved lives, and that meant everything 6 months into the training cycle. The new squadron received their first real deployment. A distress call came from the Velix system, where a mining colony was under attack by raiders. Ryan led the response with half the squadron, while Megan stayed back with the trainees. 12 Wraith fighters jumped into the Velix system and found a desperate situation. The mining colony housed over 50,000 civilians, including families and children. Raiders had seized control of the main settlement and were threatening to destroy the environmental systems unless their demands were met. Ghost Riders. "This is what we train for," Ryan said over the squadron channel. "Remember your protocols. Protect the civilians. Minimize collateral damage and watch each other." The pilots responded with precision and discipline. They disabled the raider ships without destroying them, used non-lethal weapons to neutralize threats, and coordinated with local security forces to secure the settlement. Not a single civilian died in the operation, and the raiders were captured alive. It was a textbook execution of everything the Ghost Riders stood for. When Ryan's team returned to Earth, they were greeted as heroes, but Ryan immediately deflected the praise. "We did our job," he told reporters. "Jake Morrison set the standard, and we are just trying to live up to it." The Zentari Grand Council watched humanity's actions carefully and saw something remarkable happening. These humans were not using their newfound respect to conquer or dominate. They were using it to help others. Admiral Kelvin, now the Xanthari ambassador to Earth, met regularly with General Hendricks to coordinate humanitarian efforts. A formal alliance had been established and joint training programs were expanding. "Your people continue to surprise us," Kelvin told Hendricks during one meeting. "We expected you to leverage your advantage, to demand concessions or territory. That is not who we are," Hendricks replied simply. "Or at least, that is not who we want to be," Kelvin smiled, a gesture he had learned from studying human expressions. Jake Morrison's legacy lives in more than just your pilots. It lives in your entire civilization's approach to galactic affairs. Earth's diplomatic relations expanded rapidly. The Galactic Council invited humanity to join as full members, a process that typically took centuries but was accelerated because of the Ghost Riders' actions. When the human delegation arrived at the Galactic Council chambers for the first time, they were greeted with something unprecedented. Representatives from over 200 civilizations stood in silent tribute, honoring Jake Morrison and Danny Foster. The human ambassador, Dr. Karen Hayes, stood before the council and spoke words that had been carefully prepared but came from the heart. "We accept this membership with humility and hope," Dr. Hayes said. "We know we have much to learn from civilizations older and wiser than our own, but we also bring something to this council." She continued, "We bring the lesson that two pilots taught the galaxy, that protecting the innocent is not optional, that courage and compassion matter more than power or technology." The council chambers erupted in applause, dozens of species expressing approval in their own ways. Back on Earth, in classrooms around the world, teachers told the story of the Ghost Riders to children who listened with wide eyes. It became part of history curriculum, a defining moment in humanity's journey to the stars. Why did they go? A student asked their teacher if it was against orders. The teacher smiled, because some things are more important than following rules. They saw people who needed help, and they chose to be the kind of humans who answer that call at Peterson Space Force Base. The memorial garden had grown into a place of pilgrimage. Visitors came from across Earth and beyond to see the monument and pay their respects. The Xanthari tree at the garden center had grown tall and strong, its silver leaves creating patterns of light that seemed to dance in the wind. Xanthari tradition held that such trees grew faster in places blessed by the honored dead. Ryan Walsh visited the garden every week, sometimes alone and sometimes with the other original Ghost Riders. They would sit beneath the tree and remember their friends, sharing stories and keeping the memories alive. "Do you think Jake knew?" Amy asked one evening as they sat together, that his choice would change everything like this. Frank Chun considered the question carefully. "I think he knew it mattered, but I do not think he did it for legacy or recognition. He did it because it was right," Megan said softly. "And that is exactly why it mattered so much." Ryan looked up at the monument, at the bronze fighters eternally racing through flames, and thought about his last conversation with Jake, his friend's voice over the radio ordering them to jump to safety, to tell a story, to make it count. "We made it count, buddy," Ryan whispered, knowing Jake could not hear but needing to say it anyway. "We made it count." The surviving Ghost Riders stood and saluted the monument, a ritual they had performed hundreds of times. Then they walked back to the squadron ready room where a new generation of pilots waited to learn from them. Across the galaxy, in the territories where the 2 million refugees had settled, parents told their children about the humans who saved them. The story grew and evolved, but the core remained the same. They came when no one else would, the parents would say. They fought when others ran. They sacrificed everything so that you could live in the Kresh Dominion. The new leadership had sued for peace within months of the Battle of Ashmar Nebula. The destruction of War Master Thex and his fleet had broken something fundamental in Kresh military doctrine. When asked by historians why such a powerful empire would retreat, The Kresh High Command gave an answer that was recorded in every language and archive across the galaxy. We have fought thousands of battles against hundreds of species. The Kresh military leader stated, "We have never fought an enemy who valued other lives more than their own. We cannot defeat warriors who will die to protect strangers. The humans taught us that there are limits to what power can accomplish." The statement continued, "And that true strength comes not from weapons, but from the willingness to sacrifice for others." 5 years after the battle, the Galactic Council established the Morrison Foster Award for Humanitarian Service, the highest honor given to individuals or organizations that risked everything to help others. The first recipients were the 2 million civilians saved at Ashmore Nebula. They accepted the award collectively and immediately dedicated it to the memory of the pilots who had saved them.